Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm excited to be here today. So we have an esteemed panel of 5 state legislators, all representing Teton County in one way or another, and we did talk about our topics, so we're going to go in a specific order, and I'll just quickly introduce everybody before they start. And so our first person answering the question is going to be Senator Dan Dockstader. And what I think you need to know about Senator Dockstader. So Senator Dockstader represents Sublette, Lincoln, and Teton counties. He walks softly, doesn't necessarily carry a big stick, but he carries a lot of weight in the legislature because people really respect him, and he's got a lot of wisdom. He's very thoughtful, listens to all sides of an issue before he weighs in, and people listen to him. The reason that's important for us is because he has time and time again carried the water for Teton County, and I don't think he gets enough recognition for it, or I don't think we know everything that he has done to support CWC, to support the Grand Teton Parks, land purchase, and so many other things that that he not only signs on to, but really works in the Senate. So, Senator Dockstader.
Thank you. I consider Teton County just as much as my responsibility as Sublette and Lincoln, and so that's why we work on things. And while people are standing up on the floor making big speeches, I just walk around the back door and get it taken care of quietly. Ruth Ann, I'm supposed to start with this question? Okay, I just want to thank, it's a wonderful opportunity to work with these gentlemen. It's an honor. It was an honor to work with Ruth Ann. Thank Jonathan and Spring Creek for hosting this. One most important thing to know about our region's future, Jonathan just hit it perfectly, about the state's future. This past week I have been in Casper with the Corporations Committee. I've been with the Minerals Committee in Gillette. I've been with the Water Committee in Cheyenne. Now, I'm not necessarily assigned to all those committees, but I have a much bigger, broader view of what we're working on. Everything that we deal with is the state. The region is our state, and how are we going to handle it? And obviously, one of the biggest challenges, and I heard it as I was walking in this morning, was the challenge of the mineral industry and where we're going to take it. Well, let me just give you some numbers here quickly. Right now, if you were to run the numbers from minerals, if we were to include royalties, severance taxes, ad valorem, sales and use taxes, plus the investment from our what we call our legacy minerals, permanent mineral trust fund, we'd be looking at income for the state in the percentage of about 62 to 70%. That's what we're dealing with. Okay, if we're going to cut that, how are we going to replace it? What are you going to find that will replace 62 to 70% of our income? So what would you cut? Are you willing to cut infrastructure? Are you willing to cut education before you catch the attention of the Supreme Court? What will you cut in local government funding? Our counties, our towns? What will you cut in the business designations, such as business council and so forth? The list goes on and on. What will you cut? And then how much are you willing to allow us to take from you if we cut? How much are you willing to allow us to take from you in taxes? Can we reach into your pocket and take 60 to 70% to replace the minerals? So I've kind of moved into the world of let's slow down the closure of everything. Let's find a way to fund Wyoming. We know what's going to happen in the future. We realize we won't have these minerals. In April, I was here at an infrastructure meeting at Snow King. A couple of the speakers said the goal is to completely eliminate mineral energy in 20 years. So it's not just coal, folks, it's natural gas, oil, all of it. So we've got to figure out a game plan for those 20 years. And some of my work in the legislature has simply said, let's slow down, be careful. I got a total of, in the mining industry alone, the mining industry, that's the power plants, the mines, 2,227 people to think about. We've got to get this figured out carefully because it means less money for us as a state to run, and it means 2,000 plus jobs for Wyoming families.
Thank you, Senator. Next up is Representative Roscoe. Representative Roscoe also represents Sublet, Lincoln, and Teton counties. He formerly his first go around. So we have basically a freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior legislator. Jim Roscoe would be the dropout legislator, he's come back to complete his GED. No, he formerly served in the legislature, and at that time the district was more Sublet County than the other counties. And he was so well respected by Sublet County, by all of us, because he did a great job of learning those issues, learning all of the natural gas issues, and really being able to represent them effectively in the legislature. And I know that was why he was reelected. And Representative Roscoe.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. It was a pleasure to serve with Ruth Ann years ago. But my district, just briefly, is a true mosaic, as Jonathan would say. There's ranching, minerals, and all the other stuff that we have up here. So it's truly like a little Switzerland. And I think Jonathan asked a tough question, so I'm going to dodge it. I don't think it's whether we're going to go to war with Iran or if Kelly might secede from Teton County, but so we do have problems. We have serious problems. I'm going to have to read this. I'm a terrible speaker. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and I think they've been brought up almost all the ones that I can think of already. So I'm going to move to the second part, maybe how we could help it and be fairly narrow about it. Let me put my glasses on. One way we could address these challenges is to have governance with more local control. I think it's just the people that live in these diverse economies and environments around the state have a lot better idea on how to fix their problems, and we do too. So I think we could improve on the local control that we have. Wyoming is extremely diverse, economically, socially as well, and environmentally. Here in County 22, we have a different economy than the rest of the state, with only 3% developable land. As you know most of these things. We have exorbitant real estate prices, and we have an economy based on tourism and outdoor recreation, which is unlike the rest of the state. So I think local control would benefit us. We did lose some local control in this last session. It was disappointing to me. Senate File 49, the school bill, took away our counties, partially the ability to zone our own land. And so I don't think we want to lose any more local control. I think we want to use the local control that we do have. I think the SPET tax is a great thing that Teton County has used more than any other county in the state, and I think you know the benefits of that. Improved parks, jails, and hospitals, and all the stuff that we can use. So that's a great tool. I think we should hold on to the ability to plan our county and not let that be taken away from us. And I think our building regs are good, our county ordinances, and I think we should also maintain our county input with the shared challenges we have with the Park Service, Forest Service, the YDOT, and the Game and Fish. Then we could go a step farther. We might want to ask for more local control from the state than we have now. And I think you guys are probably all aware of the need for it. So let's just take an example. We may not want to vote for a real estate transfer tax, but we might want to. But that decision should be not made in Cheyenne. It should be made here, I believe. We could also show some more local control with maybe how we spend the revenues that are generated within our own counties. The lodging tax is a perfect example. There's plenty of uses for that lodging tax money that should go to other things other than promotion, I believe. And we should be able to decide that ourselves. And a more difficult local control issue would be to adjust property tax rates that we pay. Now that we have extremely high property tax rates, it would be good if we could adjust some of our own so that we could take care of maybe the elderly and the people on fixed incomes that we are taxing out of our community. So, local control. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Representative Andy Schwartz. Okay, so Representative Schwartz's area is Teton County, excluding the town of Jackson, and then there are a couple little pieces of Teton County that are also in Representative Yin's district. But Representative Schwartz serves on the Appropriations Committee, which is a very powerful committee. He is known as Slash and Burn, Slash for short. And in all seriousness, it's really important because as Senator Dockstader laid out, we are in a crisis financially in the state, and it would be very easy to politically grandstand by fighting all of the cuts and, you know, we want money for everything, and there just isn't money for everything. And he's willing to jump in and make the really hard decisions and do the work. They all work together as a team, and I know he's very well respected for that. So, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. And I should add, my first session, if it hadn't been for Ruth Ann, I would have drowned. It's not an easy job, and it's not easy to figure out. And I would just call out and let you all know, you have a really good delegation. We don't necessarily get the outcomes we might all desire when you're sitting up here looking, but you are effectively represented by these people here who do a great job in building the relationships that are necessary to either kill the bills you hate or get the bills passed you like. So, the question, I really like Jonathan's questions. The first one I really want to talk about, because there's been some discussion that we have too many people here, we don't need this many tourists. And the bottom line is I don't think we have any control over that. I think there are factors that are larger than us that means people are going to keep coming here. We start with the fact that worldwide the middle class is growing. And we see it in the busloads of Chinese tourists. All throughout Asia, more people are entering the middle class, and they're going to want to come here because Yellowstone Park in particular is iconic, and people want to see Yellowstone. Then we've got the factor of the mobility of the workforce internationally, which means if you have the means, you can live anywhere you want and work. And this is a desirable place to live and be able to work and make money. So that's the second factor. The third factor is our economy keeps growing. We're good. I mean, we've actually done a pretty good job up to date, and I will take a little credit. Where's Mr. Barron? He deserves some credit. Mr. Guru is a local official. We've actually done a pretty good job here of planning. It's not perfect, and it's enabled our economy to keep growing. And as our economy keeps growing, that attracts more people. And then the fourth one's a little odd, but the growth of what I will call extreme recreation means that we're getting not only more people coming here, but we're getting more people penetrating the wilderness areas. And we're all talking about the ecosystem and how we protect the ecosystem. That's our highest value. And these four things have an impact on that. In terms of solutions, I would posit that we're thinking of the ecosystem too narrowly, because we basically talk about it in terms of biology. But I think we should broaden it to include socioeconomic and political factors as well. And the reason I say that is because if we're going to be solving any of what I call the infrastructure issues necessary to deal with this growth in population and tourism, we need to have those factors considered so we can create partnerships with other groups. It's not just Teton County, Idaho. It's not just Lincoln and Sublet. You have to remember we're partners with Natrona County too, because they depend on tourism, and the bulk of their tourism is people driving through Casper on their way to Yellowstone. But we can partner with them to start working on, when the tourist is in Natrona County in Casper, getting them ready for what happens when they get here. So we have a lot of work to do. But the bottom line is we have to, I think, admit we're going to have more people coming here, and we have to get better partnerships to deal with them when they are here.
Representative Yin. So Wyoming legislature is not known for diversity. Our Wyoming Women's Legislative Caucus. Our Wyoming Women's Legislative Caucus never had to fight for space to meet. And I think almost as important is age. We have such a group of, other than this stage is represents the younger portion of the legislature, but especially with Representative Yin. So for a young person to take, I'm sure many of you know, there are no health care benefits. The pay is minimal. And so for a young person to be able to make that sacrifice to travel for weeks, to be in Cheyenne, to travel all over the state year round, and certainly financially, that is a sacrifice. The gift to the state of that is not only a young perspective, but a tech perspective. Representative Yin has been involved in formerly the blockchain task force, now it's the technology task force, but involved in a lot of those new blockchain legislation that have been passed in the last couple of years. And so it really is, has been a contribution. So Representative Yin.
Thank you, Ruth Ann, and thank you, Jonathan, for hosting and bringing us all together. I was here last year, sitting in one of these seats and not on a panel, so this is definitely a new experience for me. I do want to thank you all for being here, and I want to say that to answer Jonathan's questions, I think one of the bigger pictures is that saying that what are the biggest, most important things of this region is that our region is connected to the state we live in. So whether or not it's the people over in Teton Valley, Idaho, making sure that they're represented well in Idaho, it's making sure that we make our voices heard in Cheyenne and Wyoming. And part of that is really just recognizing, I heard the phrase that we live in an ivory tower, and recognizing that that really is the perspective that we should change, and not that the people in Cheyenne are the enemy, or the people in Gillette or Campbell County or Natrona are the enemy, that we're all actually members of Wyoming, and that we're all the same tribe. And the legislature, I think, as we all know, on the panel is really a team effort. And if you start signifying that the other members of the legislature are the enemy, you really aren't going to get the things done that you want to get done. And so what I would like to see for the number 2 question, what are things that we can do individually or collectively, is really agree with Hiram's point, not just meeting with people over the hill, but also meeting people across the state, going to Lander, going to Gillette, going to Sundance, seeing the other beautiful parts of the Bighorn Mountains or Devil's Tower, and talking with people there, talking with the residents there, and seeing where are the common problems that we have that we can build solutions together. And so a lot of that is what I'm trying to do this year as a freshman representative, is to build those relationships, but I also want to challenge all of our town councilmen and county commissioners to also make those relationships with other town councilors and county commissioners, and that way you can figure out what are the problems that we can work together on. Especially if, I know we have some of our members of town council and county commission are in the leaderships of their representative organizations, and that's great, but I want to make sure every single one of our elected officials do that same thing. And to bang on the diversity of inclusion drum as well, I think the statistics for Teton County, Wyoming, is that we're 15% Latino, and that representation definitely isn't really visible here, and I think it's very distinctly not visible here. And I do thank Jonathan for making sure that there's scholarship tickets available for this event, but if we really want to get the state of our community, we definitely need to make sure that we reach out and get those voices here so they can be heard. And also, something I did notice definitely when in the legislature for the first session is that you have portraits of all of the legislatures from the past around you, and they've been all kinds of people, all different kinds. They do tend to be on the older side instead of the younger side, but what I have noticed is that this year, there are a significantly lower number of women in the legislature than there were before. And I know women's issues are going to be big ones coming up nationally and across states, across the nation, across all states. So those things matter in elections, and I'd like to see more representation across the board all over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Guru, so representing, serving in the legislature is not just about representing your community, it's about representing the state and doing what's right for the state and understanding the culture of the state. And nobody does those relationships better than Senator Guru. He takes time to travel and meet people and you know, get one-on-one with them. And it's not about telling them what our community is about, but listening to what their community is about. And I really respect that about him, Senator Guru.
Thanks, Ruth Ann. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks to everybody here at Spring Creek. As said, my name is Mike Guru, and I'm your state senator, and I've had the honor of serving you as a town councilman, planning commission, so the 88 and the planning commission, I guess it was. And then from 88 to 92 as a town councilman, then twice as a county commissioner, once elected, once appointed to serve a filled term. And 2 years in the House taking over from Ruth Ann. That was when that slide started. And then we stopped that slide when we elected Mike Yen, and I moved over to continue the slide in the Wyoming State Senate. So I have a kind of a perspective from a lot of different levels that I think helps in this job. And to answer Jonathan's question and to take off on what Representative Yin was talking about, I think it's all about relationships. I think that any problem that issue that you have, that this county or this community or this ecosystem has, can be greatly enhanced and solved in large measure by helping with those relationships and working on those relationships. Sometimes the questions beg easy answers, but they're actually not quite so easy when you peel the onion back just a little bit. Take, for example, taxes. Talk to people all the time, and I look across the room and I see folks that have real concerns about their tax issues with regard to their property taxes. But as a lot of us know, and most of us do, that 85% of our property taxes go to fund schools. So if we cut property taxes, then we're going to have a problem with funding schools. And so that becomes an issue. Yet we have no property, we have no personal income tax, we have no corporate income tax, we have those, and we have no appetite to raise them. Would you agree, Senator? Yep. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Oh yeah, the House. No appetite, is it, Senator? No, okay, thanks. So the point is, and then go back to local control, which is an issue that has come up, I've heard. You know, local control is something that is important to me as it is to you as a former commissioner, former councilman, former planning commissioner. Couldn't agree more. And that's why I think we have to be doing it better, have to be doing it right, and have to be selling ourselves to the rest of the state. Because sometimes when we do things, we get ahead of the curve so much that sometimes the rest of the state looks and does not understand fundamentally what we're doing. And so it's our challenge, and the challenge of everyone in this room, to become ambassadors and try to help the rest of the state understand these issues. And sometimes we even have to understand that maybe we went a little too far or not in particular circumstances. That's my view on it. It's a personal view from the perspective I have. And I can tell you that and look in this room, and I know I made a lot of people unhappy in the last session with a couple of votes I took, but I look you right in the eye and say that I did the best I could every day looking at that entire view and work with you to try to solve these issues as we move forward, because that's what this ecosystem deserves. That's what this ecosystem demands. But to do it, we need to work with, and we need to understand what the rest of the state is going through, what the issues they have, and the fear sometimes that they have about some of the things we do. And it's an honest fear, maybe misguided, maybe misinterpreted, but to them it's real. And a lot of this is about perception. go back to the tax thing real quick, and then I'll get off it because I want to answer your questions as well. But a lot of you would be surprised to learn that back in the day, we did not equalize property tax revenue across the state. What was earned in a county stayed in a county. Who was the county that changed that? Who was the county that stopped it? This one. John Turner, H.L. Jensen brought it to equalize taxes across the board because the mineral counties were making vast amount of money, and you're going to find this hard to believe, we were the poor county. And so that's why we did it, to be fair, for fair educational opportunities for our kids. And today I hear it spoken in rooms and talked about, people talk about, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we sending our money down? We're a recapture county now. And so that's an issue. But when you go to the history of it, you know, that's how this all came about in the first place. So we have to look back on that. We have to remember our history, work on our relationships around the state. I work on it every day, and so does the rest of our delegation. We work very hard at that. And it's important to all of us, whether it's healthcare issues or tax issues or land use planning issues, to work together to make this system, because like I say, you know, lodging tax came from this county, spec tax right here. We're the ones that are on the leading edge of a lot of these issues. But we've got to bring our friends along. And I look forward to helping you do it, and I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Okay, so I heard a lot about relationships and a lot about local control and also about our tax and financial situation. And I think I'd like to start asking about that. And not all of you have to answer every question, just if you feel like you have something you want to add to any particular question. But we all know what the problem is. Most of our property taxes that fund our schools come from minerals. That's declining. Our schools are built with co-lease bonuses. That's gone. How are we going to fund these things? What are the things that the legislature is talking about to fill in these gaps?
I didn't want to admit it, but I am on the Revenue Committee. It's sort of a suicidal mission. But when you're an independent, they don't know what to do with you. And first, let me clarify that I think local control, I didn't mean just Teton County. I meant every county in Wyoming have local control, and they are there for that as well. I didn't mean to, we do need to broaden our friendships around the state. Back to money. We've tried. I thought we had a lot of lithium, and the market for lithium was going up, and batteries were being used, and did some research on that, and we just simply don't have our lithium. We do have lithium, but it's not concentrated enough at the current price to look forward to it even for the next couple of years. So that didn't work. Anyway, we just had a Revenue Committee meeting over in Lander, and there were some good things brought up, but very little of it was passed. I think we need ideas from you guys, to tell you the truth, on how to bring in alternate sources of revenue for the state. There was a really good tax bill, revenue bill, House Bill 220, that would have, I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but it would have taxed, we are being taxed anyway by these big box stores, but we're not receiving the tax. That bill should have passed. I think it was one of the best bills of the session. That will come back again. We did vote to bring that back again in revenue. I simply don't have the answer for revenue. Anybody else?
And before anybody else answers, could someone give some perspective too? We've talked about percentages. What are we talking about in terms of numbers or services that might need to be cut? Just a little perspective on what a drop of 30% in our budget means. Or
Okay, here's an example just south of you, south of Snake River. Lincoln County is looking at losing a power plant and the associated coal mine. They have an $18 million budget. They're going to lose $10 million in their budget. What do you think is going to be cut? We've got Jeremy from Alpine. How are you gearing up for that, my friend?
Well, so Alpine will lose almost 5% of our total budget, number three going down. So, I mean, right off the bat, what's, the most important is you get to your necessities. Right off the bat, you have to focus on your necessities, sewer, water, streets, roads. Beyond that, some maintenance, parks, more of the lifestyle stuff. Do you reinvest in that, like Teton County has, and focus on lifestyle to bring that up, bring tax in, or do you just cut it? I mean, in the short term, it's bleak. You got to think of long term, and that's been the question. I raised it in last night's town council meeting.
Yeah. Sorry to throw it at you so fast. Town Councilman Jeremy Larson from Alpine. That's what we're trying to figure out. So what do we cut? I'm just simply saying with some of the legislation I'm running, don't put the airplane into a dive, slow it down and land it softly and let us get this figured out for our local governments. Let us figure it out for those 2,200 people that are employed out there. Whoa, be careful, please.
And just a quick example, when we're talking about cities and towns and cutting funding, because cutting is kind of the order of the day, because there's not that appetite, at least in one body, for tax increases. But and this is just a real world example, ecosystem type deal. Say, okay, we're going to cut funding for cities and towns. So the town decides to stop sweeping the streets after the winter. Simple thing, not a big deal. But it is a big deal, because then when it rains, the dirt and dust and rocks go into the wastewater system, and then go into Flat Creek. And now all of a sudden you've got a sediment increase in Flat Creek because the streets haven't been swept. Now all of a sudden you've taken a fishery and you're degrading the fishery and the water quality of that creek down to an unacceptable level for our ecosystem. One small cut does something big. And so we have to think in big terms, I think, sometimes about how we solve this problem. I don't want it, just to say, well, if we cut this and we cut schools. No, we have to come up with some different answers. And unfortunately, I don't think incremental across-the-board cuts work. If we're going to cut funding for, say, community colleges, and I'll just say this, because I'm going to give it, like, say, Lyndon Johnson School, one of my favorites, to give it to you with the bark off, but I'm not up for cutting funding for community colleges or the University of Wyoming. If we need to do it, let's get serious. If we may have to close one, that's a serious matter for a community. But I'm not going to stand by and say that community colleges can take a 10, 20% cut across the board, because that's not right. So we have to start thinking about this in bigger terms. And so the session coming up is very serious, and that's why I think we need to talk about these revenue streams, talk about what's the art of the doable. Local control means a local lodging tax. Local control means more spet ballot questions, so we can tax ourselves and solve our own problems. Those might be the ways to go. And at the state level, I really think we need to look at some new options as well.
Briefly, during session, a request to lower the severance tax on coal, lower the ad valorem on gas and oil, and reduce the ad valorem on uranium. And we voted not to do that, so we did do that.
So on the bright side, we do have revenue issues, and I am a proponent of some of the taxes that have been proposed, but we need to recognize we've been pretty smart in a lot of ways. We have a rainy day account. It's the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. We have wonderful names. That's got about $1.7 billion in it. We have other reserve accounts with another $500 million. The total investment capacity of the state is about $20 billion. And we are able to get a lot of revenue from investing that money, partly thanks to you all, because we passed a constitutional amendment a couple years ago that allow us to put more money into equities. Last year, I think the revenue we got from that was a little over $500 million. This is real money, and it's going to help us offset the losses we are getting from other revenue streams, which are inevitable. As a member of Appropriations, and I am slash and burn, and I'm damn proud of it, not many Democrats get to be called that, we have to be careful how we cut. We will, starting in December, we will have every agency of the executive branch come in and present their budget. And we will be looking as a group very closely at what they present, and there will be cuts. But I agree with Senator Garou. Just saying we're going to take a 10% cut everywhere is not the best way for us to manage our budget, and more importantly, it is certainly not the best way to provide services for you all, because you may not even be aware of some of the services you get from the state, but they're valuable services. So I'm not holding my breath for tax increases. I think a corporate tax would be worthwhile. Certainly a statewide lodging tax would be of value, but we'll have to talk about that, senators.
So there was a lot of talk about relationships, and I'd like to expand that to the culture of the legislature. I think it's easy to sit here in our corner of the state and criticize the intentions of legislators, and question. I heard a lot this session questioning if they were influenced by money. I'll let these guys answer that. But if they were questioned by, if they were influenced by money, or if they were influenced by power, or whatever it might be, and if a couple of you would take a minute and talk about your perception of people's intentions in the legislature and the culture.
Sure. As a freshman, I'll start off with the perspective that I gained in the first session. I do think most people's intentions are overall good. They want to see a betterment in the community. We just have a major disagreement on how we achieve that betterment in our communities. You talk to each individual person, and they each have their own story of how they got there, who they are, what their perspective is, and you try to build that common ground of what your story is versus their story, and how we can build relationships together. And I do think there are a lot of people who come from the perspective of having businesses, and so that's the perspective that they come from, but I don't think there is an intent there to say that they want to destroy Wyoming or ecosystems or et cetera. They just come from the story of, I raised this business, so I want to see other people be able to uplift their businesses too. But I think it's also, on a very national level, we try to see this huge partisanship, and I don't think that really comes across as much in the statewide legislature. I think it's actually, we all realize it's a majority Republican legislature. We all realize that we need to work across the aisle to do things, and we know that to do that, we work together. And so I think the first couple of bills, all of them, I had co-sponsors on the other side of the aisle, because that's how you get things done. And so building those relationships are there. I think you're correct that the intent is not negative. And I'll
Do
stop
they
with
hate
that.
us in Teton County?
I wouldn't say hate is a strong word. Hate is a strong word. I would say that, like I said before, it's building those relationships and not knowing the other side's story. So whether it's us not knowing their story, or them not knowing our story, and so it's just building those relationships to solve that problem.
They don't hate you. We're building schools, and they're starting to eyeball Munger, and I'm talking about going around through the back door. I said, leave Munger alone. We're going to build it, and there isn't. It gets that perception. Talk to us. We'll work with you along the way. I'll be up here anytime you want. I'm not opposed to that. You talk about money. I just made trips to Gillette and Casper on my own time and dime. I pay for my own expenses. With the legislative job, I serve on Lower Valley Energy's board. I've just paid for all my travel with those trips so I could track what's happening with 911 co-ops across the nation, because we are dealing with co-op power here and power plants, and I need to understand what the rest of the nation is doing, so I just pay for it myself. It's a complete loss both ways, not for money or power or glory.
I guess the best way to describe it, and I told this at my table, my good friend Representative Tyler Lindholm, who stands out in the crowd if for no other reason he's 6'7", and we came into the legislature at the same time, and we're good buddies. And the issue of Teton County's problem in the legislature came up in a conversation with him, and his response was, Andy, I don't vote against your bills because you're from Teton County. I vote against your bills because I don't like them. And that's true. I mean, I tend to run bills that are, to say the least bit, a little controversial. Let's see, real estate transfer tax failed, Medicaid expansion failed, protecting critical wild winter habitat failed. Have I forgotten any? Yeah, there's about 10 more. And I know they're controversial bills. I want to have the conversation. I don't necessarily expect them to pass, but I want to make sure we're having these conversations. And we do. And they're not voting against them because I'm from Teton County. They don't like the bills, and that's fine, but at least we have the conversation, and they respect that I bring them and the reasons why I bring them. So we just need to keep plugging away, and it'll work out, maybe.
I guess just to fit, I think best way to describe this, no, is the short answer. They don't hate us. I get a call from a city councilman in Laramie that is totally convinced that I, myself, the Wyoming legislature, and the University of Wyoming are hell-bent on ruining 15th Street in Laramie, that we're trying to turn off their water system by letting them drill a well and water the golf course at the University of Wyoming. The folks in Goshen County are upset. They wanted to run a bill a couple of years ago because they didn't like the way their fair board spent money, so they wanted to run a bill that said the fair board couldn't spend more than $25 without legislative approval. And so the point of all that is everybody feels like they're picked on a little bit. There are 99 cities and towns across the state of Wyoming, and every single one of them is special, every single one of them is unique, and every single one of them at one time or the other thinks the legislature is trying to do something to them that they shouldn't. So we're not alone. We're all in it together, and that's really is the point of it. And one of the things we tried to do this year, we had the technology task force here, and I try to invite all committee meetings that I can to come to Teton County, as we all do. And when we do, we try to invite a few of the legislators to come, a few of the local electeds to come. I had a little deal at my house not too long ago, and we just talked to them, and we invite them. And through a conversation actually between Commissioner Barron and Councilman Jorgensen to Senator Ogden Driscoll from Devil's Tower, who's not really one of the people who understands Teton County to its fullest degree, actually was here, and we invited him to a city council meeting, county commission city council meeting, and he went. He left his own committee meeting, which he's a co-chair of, left that meeting and spent 3 quality hours with the town council and the county commission and listened to them talk about housing. And he walked out of that meeting with a different perspective. And he goes, man, I've seen councilmen fight. I've seen people pull guns in meetings. I ain't never seen what you guys just went through in there. That was incredible. And actually, I went to the Word Hotel and had a drink with some folks, and some of the city councilmen, the mayor came in, and they all sat and talked. And afterwards, he called me and he said, that was the most productive use of my time in a long time. I learned a lot about Teton County and really appreciate the fact that he got a chance to meet those folks. And that's how we're going to work on this, and that's one person at a time. And we'll get there, and I'm fully convinced that we will. Thanks.
Okay, so I've asked a lot of leading questions. This one sounds like a leading question, but it's not. Do you think we have a responsibility or would be well served as citizens to reach out to the rest of the state to try to develop relationships? And if so, is there something tangible you can recommend to us to do that?
Short answer, yes. Easiest thing to do, travel around the state. When you travel around the state, go to a coffee shop, or my preference, a bar, sit down and talk to the person next to you. And you will discover you have things in common. They will discover that people from Teton County are not, we don't have four heads and six eyes, and we're just like them. Go to a bar.
Or a coffee shop?
That's a good idea, but you will have to admit you're from Teton County. Sometimes that's hard to do. I say I'm from Pinedale usually.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said in the opening remarks, go out, meet people, say hi, be a normal person, realize that everyone else in Wyoming is a normal person, develop relationships.
Yep, just go visit with them, and when you say you're from Teton County and they roll their eyes and they start saying, oh, God, Teton County, just let them go. Do not try to engage the argument. Then when they're finished, you say, okay, I'm still sitting here, and now let's talk about the issue I came to talk to you about. Works every time.
The most success I've had in the legislature is developing working relationships. I would encourage you to do the same from Teton County with the rest of the state. Try to do that in my legislative career. Try to do that in my business as we travel. We do, the main part of our business is we live stream high school athletic events. We have a chance to visit, in the past few years, almost every high school in this state. You develop those working relationships with them, get to know them. Get out, shake hands, get to know them.
Great. Does
I think-
anybody?
Excuse me. I think Dan is one of the best at this, but we are, as a people, I think we're provincial. And I'd really noticed this before. We have a place down in Sublette County, and the people in Sublette County would say, I don't want to be like Jackson. And the people in Jackson would say, oh, you're down in Sublette County? I understand you have a little oil and gas, a little gas development down there. It's the second largest field in the country. So I don't think we do reach out enough.
Okay, anybody out there have any questions?
Hi, Cynthia Blankenship. One thing we haven't heard anything about is entrepreneurship in this area as a way of diversifying our economy. And I also have a comment, which is that not everybody hates coming here. We just had a Bitcoin convention here, or meeting or something, and afterwards Silicon Couloir hosted a panel discussion, and a lot of the folks, it was packed, first of all, packed house, and a lot of the people on the panel said they actually love coming here because this community is so open-minded and tech-savvy that it's their favorite place to meet. So entrepreneurship.
Why not? You've got Jackson, the first gigabit community in the state of Wyoming. Our company ran a live stream announcement with Silver Star when they did that. We brought the governor on to announce that Jackson, Thane, and Alpine were the first gig communities. And now we're running 10 gig into the Jackson airport. Why not have entrepreneurship? I asked the folks at Silver Star, really 10 gig to the Jackson airport? And they said, just because we can, just because we can. And how about power? Lower Valley Energy, 6.3 cents. Can you buy power anywhere in the world less than that? I don't know, Ted Austin from Fall River, what are you're in that ballpark? 6.3 cents. Why aren't we getting companies here? We've got the high-speed internet, we've got the low power, we've got the cool temperatures, we've got the great scenery. Why aren't we doing a better job with that? I say yes. Then we slow the mineral down, start to pick up the high-tech industry.
Cynthia, great question, and I do agree. As a matter of fact, when they were sitting around my barbecue pit around the back of the house, they were all talking about, well, so what is the gig speed in Jackson? We do this, and I'm trying to answer. It's like, these are people that want to bring, companies with 100 or 200 people and bring them to Jackson, and the whole time I'm thinking, Pinedale is a great town, and Lincoln County is a wonderful place to go because, at the same moment, I'm excited because they're talking about it, but at the same time, it's like, I know a lot of people aren't so wild about that in this county necessarily of growing that as much. So I try to, talk about the virtues of all the other communities close around us.
I'll take it real quick. I'm a member of the blockchain task force that you mentioned, and the one that we're turning into a technology innovation task force, because I do think that the legislature sees that as one avenue for economic diversification. And I think some of it, sometimes they use Jackson as a talking point, but I think other times they'd use the University of Wyoming as a talking point. The next meeting that we have is going to be in Laramie, and it's going to be at the same time that they organize a YO hackathon. And so the idea there is to basically justify the University of Wyoming as a good place that you can grow entrepreneurship and grow companies. And I think Laramie is a great place to do that. And many other reasons that Jackson is a great place to do that, and that they have the outdoor stuff there in Laramie as well. So I do think that is a distinct avenue, and I'm glad that I'm part of that task force to be able to drive that direction. And I see that as one of the possible many diversification avenues for our state.
Once again, I think this room could come up with entrepreneurship almost better than any other. It's intimidating being such an intelligent group. But Kemmer could possibly become a ghost town. And they have a workforce. Teton County does not have a workforce that's not already employed. They all live in their own homes. Their families are there. The houses, they own their own homes. Schools, roads. There's even a railroad there. If someone could come up with a business could relocate in Kemmer, they would probably get their picture on the state flag or the coin or something.
So diversification, as long as I've lived in Wyoming, Wyoming has talked about diversifying the economy, and here we are 40-something years later, and we still rely on coal, gas, oil. Partly because budget is policy. And when we do our budget, we continue to fund coal, gas, oil, and give lip service to truly diversifying the economy. And it shows. And Jackson's not if you travel around the state, you'll see it more clearly, that the opportunities for entrepreneurship and diversifying the economy aren't as great as they are here. So that's problem one. Problem two, and Senator Dockstader doesn't want to hear this from me again, but our tax policies are such that even if we diversify the economy, we still don't make any money off of it because we don't tax it. And so we actually, if we diversify the economy and we bring more workers into the state, it actually has a negative impact on the state budget. So it's a great idea, but from my perspective, sitting on the Appropriations Committee, please don't diversify.
On that sunny note, any more questions? Yes.
I'm a novice to this group and some of these discussions, and I really appreciate the education. Thank you, all of you. And so I have two quick questions. First, is there a primer that you could point us to summarize the economic history and the current economic situation of Wyoming, particularly in terms of the dynamics between Jackson, Teton County, and the other counties? It seems to me that Jackson's pretty obviously an outlier in this state, and it'd be interesting to understand the politics and the economics of that. But that's the afterward, perhaps you can make a suggestion about that if you like. If there is a revenue shortfall, there's obviously two ways to deal with it. One is to talk about cuts, and the other is to talk about tax increases. And when that has been brought up by Andy, the response was something like a laugh. I understand this is a Republican state, but what are the prospects for a kind of cultural shift in the state and in the state legislature where they will rethink the question of revenue streams, whether it's a income tax or whatever?
Let the Senate answer.
Okay, I drew the short straw. You know, Andy goes back to the point, you know, our forefathers were clairvoyant when they passed a law that said that part of our mineral severance taxes will go into what we call the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. And that we have more, how much is that now? I can't even remember now. No, Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, 8-9 billion. I mean, we've got a 23rd largest sovereign wealth fund on the planet. We have as much money on deposit as the Saudis, okay? And what we do is we can only spend the interest on that money. Talk about clairvoyant group, to not allow us to reach in and spend any of that money. So we can spend the interest off it, plus we get a cut of it. And so that's where our revenue comes. And we talk about cutting spending, and we talk about raising taxes, and then we all sit back and we wait until the investment dollars come in. And when the investment dollars comes in, we call it refueling. It refuels all our accounts that we borrow money from to pay off the budget that we have, and then all of a sudden we're whole again, and we go back to having the same argument. And so we just keep circling around this way. And one of these days, it's going to bite us if we don't do something about it in more of a long-term systematic way. So those are the questions. But we do, you know, it's not just necessarily a partisan question. We bail ourselves out with this interest income, and then we all kind of go home and say, whew, we got through that one. So are we going to keep doing that? Or are we going to answer the question? Right now, it kind of gives us an easy way out. I hate to say it, but that's just kind of the long and the short of it from my view. I'm sure there'll be others. Senator.
I think as a follow-up to that, I've spent about 36, 37 years covering small town councils in their meetings from a media standpoint. And I've watched them scrape and dig and try to figure out, Councilman Larson, you know, are we going to do this street this year? Or how much can we budget for snow removal? Oh, there's too much snow this year. We don't have that money for it. Well, where do you come up with it? I've seen these small towns just work so hard to live within their means. And I'm not thoroughly convinced that we as a state are doing that. Have we thoroughly covered every base and decided where can we live within our means? We have an efficiency study. Is it completely done? Have we addressed it? No, we haven't followed up entirely on that. Are we doing like these small towns, living within our means? We have a great education system, but a word of caution. We're at what, 17,000 a student now? Is that where we're at? 17,000 a student. I talked to our neighbors out to the west, and they're telling me figures like 5,000 or 6,000, and they're using schools far beyond their given life. Are we doing a good enough job to tighten it up, to live within our means? I've done that with my own business now for nearly 40 years. Can we do this a better job at a state before we reach into your pockets and take another dime?
Bob, I think you hit the nail on the head, is the psychological change, and I have no idea how to do it. But what were we talking about?
Is there an appetite for revenue?
I talked to the director of the Department of Revenue about it. What are we going to do? Smart guy. He said we well, we're on a race to the bottom if we don't start raising revenue and taxing ourselves. He thought we should look at other states that are similar to ours, and he picked South Dakota. It doesn't have minerals, which is good, and that's what we were looking for. But it's agricultural, rural, broad, and they pay about twice the property tax that we do. But so since my property tax just skyrocketed last week, I saw, it doesn't sit well up in Teton County, but that was from the Department of Revenue. That was his idea of one way to address the shortfall in revenues.
I mean, I'm going to continue to support tax increase, you know, creating some new revenue streams, knowing that I am unlikely to succeed in the near future. But I think the way the Wyoming legislature works is ultimately very slowly, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. These issues that, you know, it's kind of like a garden, and you plant your seeds, and some of them die, and eventually a couple of them grow. And hopefully at some point we will find a way to augment our revenue stream In the meantime, we're okay. We got enough savings. We'll get by. Right now, the general fund actually is balanced. The only shortfall, the way we do our budget, we have a $300 million biennial shortfall for education, and we have the savings to deal with that for quite some time. So I'm cautious, I'm just going to keep trying.
My name is Veronica, and I have a question that ties into a lot of the very specifics that have been going on today. But one thing that hits me is I'm sitting here, I am also getting a little bit distracted because when we're talking about diversity, one thing that hits me is maybe diversity should come in the form of age, sex, race, background. But could diversity come in the form of conversation? In the conversations that we're having, how many people read the sheet that Jonathan wrote here? This is a huge global issue that's so important, and we are so uniquely positioned to do something about it, which is what we're all here to talk about. But we are going down the funnel talking about problems and how to assuage problems and do less harm or to do better. And I'm wondering if the conversations, and then maybe politically, I am not very well politically informed. But when I hear these things like we need to keep plugging along and we'll get there and planting seeds, I agree with all of that. And I'm wondering that is a process and that's a reality that we're tied to. But at the same time, could we do something like in a day like today, 22 and 21, could we completely reimagine our system? So, maybe there's too many people for the system or the environment that we have today, but what would it look like if we changed the system, if we reimagined something that doesn't even exist without being tethered to all of the real restraints that are preventing those? Because if we do that, we have the same conversations that go over and over again, and we keep running against the same problems. But maybe if we did this exercise where we completely reimagined our reality, our system, our policies, our revenue streams, maybe then we could extract a few solutions.
So is the question, is there the opportunity to just throw it all up in the air and start from?
Yeah, is there an opportunity with the scenario planning or some of the charrettes and table conversations to say, what would it look like to reimagine something we haven't even thought of before? And in that, could the solution help us with the real issues that we have today?
It's a great question, and I'm going to throw it at these two guys. But it's like when we were talking about the blockchain task force. Wyoming right now is on the cutting edge in the financial world with this new emerging with Bitcoin, and not Bitcoin, but blockchain, and about where it's going and where it's going in the future. And right now, it's something that Wyoming's leading the way. Right now, 3 states are considering legislation in their legislature that we passed last year. So they're following us. Then Senator Dockstader, and I'm going to hand in the microphone, is at the cutting edge of talking about things in aviation and things they're working on that are real big picture stuff that talk about in the future. And so now I'm going to hand it to him. But those are just 2. But there's a lot of others out there that we really are working on, and we kind of don't give them the credit that we should. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, you hit this perfectly. Done that with my own business. We sat down and said 3 or 4 years ago, we can't be just what we're doing, a little country paper anymore. How can we diversify onto that website? So we went to broadcast terrestrial radio, then we went to live stream video. We thought, can we get 3,000 or 4,000 people watching a football game on a Friday night out of Wyoming? We're disappointed if we don't have 14,000 people watching. And we can see where they're watching across the country, plus out in places like Afghanistan and Kuwait. They're watching football in Wyoming because we thought beyond what we were doing normally. And we do that each and every week in our business. And then I sat down in the legislature, what can we do different? 'Cause we have this new emerging with Bitcoin, and not Bitcoin, but blockchain. And we can see where they're watching across the country, plus out in places like Afghanistan and Kuwait. They're watching football in Wyoming because we thought beyond what we were doing normally. And we do that each and every week in our business. a fellow that's developing in Alpine says, "What do you know about VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing?" I said, "Not a lot." So I started to learn, and I traveled around the country on my own expense, trying to figure this out. And then we got with Governor Meade, and we flew people into Alpine and had a big conference. I have never seen that many Learjets in one little airport before. And we had companies and names there that I can't repeat because they were there privately. And we talked about doing a vertical takeoff and landing manufacturing facility in Wyoming. We packed them up in helicopters and vans and drove them up to Afton and showed them where we have a certificate where we're building airplanes right now. And we says, as you develop this, why don't you think about a place where we've got cold temperatures, crosswinds, and canyons, and we got waters out across the Palisades that you can test these things. And we continued that discussion, and now I got a new governor that I got to train in this. And we're going to continue working on that. This month, I'm going back to D.C. to meet with all of these big companies as they hold a big convention again. Because we're not far from the day when 6 to 12 people are going to get in a vertical takeoff and landing electric vehicle and transport from point A to point B. They're getting ready to do test runs in Dallas right now, from the airport down to the city, down into the city. They're actually doing some of this right now. So that's thinking beyond the normal. Believe me, we're trying. I'm reaching out and knocking on every door I can. Even when we talk about shutting down a power plant, I knew the proprietor of that power plant. He's worth about $48 billion. I called the company. I says, "Can I go out east and meet with him? I'm trying everything I can. Everything."
And that's the great thing about the state of Wyoming, I think, is that we have such, we're able to maneuver through the system because of the attitude we have. I wish we had time to go through all of the Wyoming firsts. But I think our time is up. I want to thank all of you for your service. I know that, that it is a sacrifice, and we appreciate all of the time and resources you put into the job that you do representing us.
It struck me that even though the tone was quite different, where the local officials were talking about growth-related problems and the state officials were talking about constriction-related problems, one theme that kept emerging was that of local control. That it seems whether you're on your way up or whether you're on your way down, there seems to be a real desire in a sense that local control can help move that through. And help ease the pain and enhance the opportunities. But I would, couple other observations just from this is that when I was a kid, when I was a small child, there was a nursery rhyme or a tale that my mother would read to us about the mice got together and they decided that the way that they would prevent themselves from being hurt was it would be a really great idea to put a bell on the cat's tail. And everybody thought, yeah, that was a really great idea, until the wise old mouse asked the question, well, who will put the bell on the cat's tail? And I won't break into the song, and I'll spare you on that one. But the point is that there are some, I think we're all agreed here on issues of regionalism and trying to work together. And you know, each of the legislators talked about we need to get out more and build these relationships and all that, which is absolutely right. But the bell on the cat's tail, who will do it, the question is, and where are we going to find the time? Where are we going to find the resources? What are we not going to do, whether it's work or personal relationships or recreation or any of the things that we actually do in our lives? And I think that's the great challenge, that if we're going to take ourselves to the next level collectively, we need to be thinking about how are we going to actually restructure it, which is the brilliance of your question, Veronica, because we can keep doing things in the same way we're doing them, and we clearly are making progress, we're getting better, but if we're going to take them to the next level, if we're going to really hit our potential, then we have to rethink the possibilities. There's going to be a way to start thinking about that, at least during the last hour of our session together. So for those of you who can stay, hopefully, whether you call it a charrette or scenario planning or just thinking outside the box, that will be the last hour we have together.